Hello, and welcome to an overview of the Nerac clinical literature evaluation process as required per MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3, Clinical Evaluation, a Guide for Manufacturers and Notified Bodies. Nerac is an independent third party who understands the requirements of MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3 and has extensive knowledge in medical devices. Hello, my name is Donna Mitchell-McGaldy. I'm Project Manager and Analyst here at Nerac, and I will be your presenter. This brief presentation is to provide you with information concerning the clinical literature evaluation process with the Nerac team. I will briefly go over what the clinical literature evaluations are and why they're required. I will address how we identify and select clinical literature to be used in your clinical literature evaluation reports. I will outline what is provided in the summary of the clinical data and appraisal section of your report, and I'll break down the elements of the clinical literature report. The clinical literature evaluations are an assessment of the published clinical literature concerning a particular device or group of devices with a specific intended use. The evaluation is conducted to determine the safety and performance of the device, its intended use, and intended patient population. This has been a requirement since the 2009 revision to the MedDev 2.7.1. These evaluations are required by MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3, Clinical Evaluation, a Guide for Manufacturers and Notified Bodies, and are required to obtain and maintain CE marks in the European Union. The clinical literature evaluation is a subsection of the larger clinical evaluation report. Our clients utilize the clinical literature evaluation reports to provide evidence for safety and efficacy to the notified body or to the FDA to obtain and maintain approval for marketing their medical devices. As stated previously, they are a requirement of MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3 and apply to all class devices. A clinical literature evaluation is required for Class 1 sterile, all Class 1 non-sterile, all Class 2A, Class 2B, and Class 3 devices, and this is not likely to change with the new regulatory framework currently being debated in the European Union. What will change, however, is a broadening of the definition of medical device. Now, this is years away, but it's worth mentioning as it will include devices that historically did not require a clinical literature evaluation. Clinical literature evaluation updates are required every 1 to 3 years depending on the risks associated with the device. A Class 1, for example, may not need an update for 3 years, while a Class 3 will need one annually. It's important to note that the guidelines do not specify how often updates should be done, and therefore notified bodies may have differing opinions. Companies of various sizes come to Nerac for assistance with the clinical literature evaluation for several reasons. Nerac has access to many peer-reviewed databases not available free via the Internet. They include but are not limited to Medline, Biosis, Embase, and Scopus, etc. Nerac has a team of experts who have many years' experience in searching various databases. Our experts are also cross-disciplined. We have electrical engineers, advanced material experts, pharmaceutical and biological experts. And this is very beneficial when you have a medical device that has an advanced materials component or an electrical component or is a combination device. Nerac has years of experience with successful clinical literature evaluations. Nerac has created a dynamic process and a report that exceeds notified body expectations. Nerac also has an extensive network of regulatory collaborators, which helps to keep us updated as to regulatory changes, notified body expectations, and is a valuable resource for brainstorming challenging situations. Nerac provides an objective third-party opinion. This tends to be looked upon more favorably by the notified body as this minimizes the chance for selection bias to be insinuated into the report analysis. The first thing we need to do is to set up a meeting between the business development manager and a project manager. The contact information for those people is provided to you at the end of the presentation, and we'd love to hear from you. The initial discussion will focus on the devices to be evaluated, their intended use, intended patient population, and the scope of the evaluations. Is this an update, for example? Nerac will provide an overview of the process. We will go over the steps and what to expect with each step. Nerac will provide an overview of the deliverables. We will provide you with a detailed description as to what the deliverable will contain and what format it shall be provided to you. Discussion will focus on deadline and budget. For example, do you have an upcoming audit that we need to take into consideration? Nerac shall provide you with a document listing the information required to provide you with an accurate proposal and cost. For example, we'll need the IFU. We'll need documentation as to how the device works, its intended population. We'd like to know if you also would like us to include FDA MAUDE data, etc. Next on the agenda, we'll briefly go over the clinical literature selection process. This includes the search strategy protocol, the methodology, and the weighting schedules that we'll use. The search strategy protocol. The search strategy protocol is a separate document outlining the device in question and its intended use and population. The goal of the search strategy protocol is to outline exactly how Nerac will conduct the search, what resources we're going to utilize, we're going to determine the search terms and the selection criteria. This is a controlled document and it will need to be approved by Nerac and by the client. It is critical that the search criteria and the terms are well understood and agreed upon before we continue onward with the project. Search methodology. Nerac conducts a search of the clinical literature in order to identify relevant clinical data pertaining to the safety and performance of a device and its competitive equivalents. Now, these searches are conducted in a variety of peer-reviewed databases such as Medline, Embase, Biosis, Life Sciences Collection, Scopus, PubMed, and the Cochrane database. Once the research results are returned, Nerac takes a three-stage approach to identifying which articles to include in the clinical literature evaluation. Nerac has a three-stage approach to identifying and selecting the published clinical literature to be utilized in the clinical literature evaluation. Stage 1, we run our initial searches in the databases. Nerac can search several different databases at one time using a Boolean strategy. After the initial results are listed, we commence with the removal of duplicates, non-English articles, meeting posters, conference proceedings, guidelines, review and overview articles, opinion and editorial papers, any non-clinical studies, and any non-peer-reviewed studies. This is done through looking through the abstracts only. Stage 2, the remaining articles from Stage 1 are applied and are sent to the client for final approval for the full text. Once the full text is ordered, then what we'll do is we'll use weighting schedule D1, which is cited in the MedDev guideline, and any article with a score of 3 will be excluded. And I'll go into more detail in that in the next slide, the next couple of slides. Stage 3 will review the remaining articles and apply MedDev weighting schedule D2, and then this will result in the final number of articles for the clinical literature evaluation. Stage 1 inclusion criteria. Now, for an article to be included for review, it must meet one or more of the following criteria. It has to be a clinical study addressing safety, efficacy, and performance of the devices, its intended use, or any competitive equivalent devices. It has to be a comparison study of the device and its intended use. It has to mention the specific device and its intended use. It has to be any article that identifies failures, complications, adverse events relating to the device and its intended use. Case studies will only be considered if they address the complications directly associated with your device. This weighting schedule is taken directly from the MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3. It addresses the device intended application, the intended patient population, and the data. For a device, it's important to identify if the device being evaluated is the specific device or competitive equivalent, or if it's a different device altogether. It's also paramount to determine if the use of the device in the clinical study is consistent with the device's intended use and intended patient population, as described in the manufacturer's IFU. Lastly, we need to determine if there is sufficient data concerning safety and efficacy of the device mentioned in the study. Any full-text article receiving a grade of 3 for one or more of this criteria is going to be excluded and noted in the bibliography of your report. This weighting schedule is also taken directly from MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 3. All remaining studies from Stage 2 are now going to be applied to this weighting schedule in Stage 3. It's also much more subjective in nature, so by the time that we get to this stage, all designs should be appropriate as we've already weeded out the non-clinical studies, the meeting posters, the reviews, etc., and should be left with only high to medium quality studies. We also need to address outcome measures, follow-up times, statistical significance, and of course clinical significance will all be addressed accordingly. It's important to note that no statistical analysis is provided for the clinical literature evaluation that is beyond the scope intended for the MedDev, as this is not meant to be a meta-analysis. All full-text articles remaining after Stage 3 are read in full and the clinical data is analyzed. This data includes, but it's not limited to, the total number of patients, the gender ratio, the mean age, the age range, the device being evaluated and its manufacturer, if it's provided, clinical endpoints, results, complications, adverse events, study conclusions, study limitations, and of course some analyst notes. That's the type of information that's going to be pulled out and represented in the clinical data and appraisal section of the report. Now, this is a typical table of contents for our clinical literature evaluation reports. It's a dynamic format that meets the MedDev 2.7.1, or excuse me, .1 Rev 3 requirements. The draft is typically delivered 3 to 4 weeks' time from signing of the statement of work. If you would like more information or have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Paul, Ron, or myself. Our contact information is provided on this slide. We do hope to hear from you, and we look forward for an opportunity to work with you. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.